Most people operate and move within a space thinking that they're safe. And a lot of times that feeling of safety disappears once you no longer feel that you're in a safe place. But I also want to make sure we stress another point here. When we're talking about safety, we're not talking about just a place that you're safe physically. We're also talking about emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, just knowing that you're in a space where you can move freely without feeling like you've been violated. But once that violation occurs, how you move going from that point forward changes altogether. And I want to tell you how a feeling of safety can quickly shift from feeling safe to being unsafe in a moment's notice. And when one of the earliest times that actually happened to me. So the time was 1987. I was 18 years old. I had just graduated from high school and I had now been admitted to the University of Tampa. At this particular point, I am now going 900 miles away from home. I grew up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and I'm now going to this small, private, affluent liberal arts school in the heart of downtown Tampa. And again, this was all completely new to me. So here I am going to this small campus. It is affluent. It is predominantly white, like 95% white. And I'm literally finding myself in a space that I am completely unfamiliar. I find myself now being in a room, rooming with two other young men, two white guys, and we're all 18. We're all fresh out of high school, and we're all starting this new chapter of our lives as we head into adulthood. Now, like with all things, for those of you who have kids or have family members or friends who've gone to college, having periods of tensions and kind of bumping heads is kind of the normal part of the growing process. You're now getting used to dealing with and interacting with people that you're not necessarily familiar with. And as such, there's going to be those growing pains as you kind of figure out each other's space and how to engage each other. But during this initial time, during the first, I'd say about month and a half there, nothing out of the ordinary actually occurred that gave me any reason to believe that my safety was in jeopardy. But one of the tough things that I had to experience during the time period was being in this space where I felt I had to move a little differently. See, keep in mind, I am now in this environment where I'm dealing with students who come from means. In other words, they have money. They have the financial support of their families who are able to assist them in doing a variety of different things. Me, on the other hand, I wasn't. And it wasn't a knock on my mother, who was extremely proud and happy that her child went off to college. It was the reality that she was not in a position financially to be able to support me in the same way my classmates were. I was in an environment where we had young kids around me who had, microwaves and hot plates and miniature refrigerators and phones in their room and so forth. None of those things were readily available to me because I didn't have money to do so. For me, it was just about survival. The other thing that was unique during that time period, unlike maybe today's time, is that in order to wash your clothes, you had to go with the good old-fashioned quarter system. 4 quarters to wash your clothes, a quarter to dry, and usually the quarter would only be about 15 minutes, so you used about a good dollar to get everything dry. So in order to be able to make sure your clothes stayed clean, you needed to make sure you had a few dollars just for that. Not even throwing in the fact of how much money you're going to need for, bleach and dish and washing detergent and things of that nature. And again, I was in a different place because I didn't necessarily have money coming into me to be able to do those things. So for me, it was about survival. So I had to be very mindful of stretching out my clothes. Not saying that I didn't have anything clean to wear. It's just that because I only got money very infrequently, I had to basically stretch out my wardrobe as long as I possibly could until I could get money from home to be able to wash clothes. Unfortunately, what that oftentimes meant is that there would be extended periods of time where my clothes would diminish because I would actually have more dirty clothes than I actually had clean clothes. And this proved to be kind of an unfortunate situation, but it was also the reality. The other part was that me and my two roommates were sharing this one room space where there was one bed off to the side and a bunk bed that I shared with one of my roommates as well. I was on the top bunk, he was on the bottom bunk. And so again, I had to be mindful that the sheets that I brought in with me, I had to change them off accordingly. And then again, they would be with the rest of my dirty clothes that was stacking up. I found myself in this situation of just bracing for the reality that I would only get money every now and then. And as such, I knew that there would be these long periods of time that I would not necessarily have readily available clean linen or readily available clean clothes until I knew I'd get a couple of dollars from my mom so that I could take care of these things. But for me, this was my reality. I didn't care that any of my classmates were in a better financial position to be able to do things, like even doing things like washing laundry. In my mindset, I felt like I could wash my laundry or take care of my clothes within the context of the manner that works best for me. So as far as that was concerned, I didn't have a problem. I moved within my space and I didn't worry about anything until this day when my safety reality was completely blown apart. So here's a situation. I'm about, like I said, about a month and a half in, and I come back home. I come back to the room from class. We live in a dorm that's no longer there. It's called DeLoe Hall. We were on the ninth floor. So I get up to the ninth floor, get off the elevator, and as I step off the elevator, I look into the hallway and I see clothes everywhere. And of course, being a college kid, you're like, what idiot left their clothes out here? And why is it all over the place? Until I started looking closely and realizing all those clothes were mine. And then as I looked even closer, I realized I saw some linen in places. It was the sheets that I had off the bed too. They had been taken off my bed and were in the hallway. And so I'm literally looking from corner to corner because this is a long hallway, and there my clothes are everywhere, and my sheets and my pillowcases everywhere. And I was just completely blown away. And so I slowly but surely I grabbed the sheet, and I just started putting all my clothes on the sheet, and then I tied it up into a ball. And then I went back into my dorm room, put the ball of clothes on top of the bed, and then I sat on the bed. And I just sat there in shock and in disbelief. I did not have a clue what the hell had just happened. And the hard part is because, and I know there's some people who are going to listen to this right now saying, man, they could have done it me. That wouldn't have been me. I'm not thinking like that. And first of all, for those of you who are saying that wouldn't have been me, I'm thinking in my mind, I didn't think this would be me either. And so in my mind, I'm like, I didn't know where they were. I didn't know how to find them. My first instinct was, what the hell do I do next? So I'm literally sitting there because I'm now going through the mental Rolodex of every scenario and how that scenario would impact me. It never crossed my mind to go to the resident assistant and ask for help. I didn't know who you report for somebody doing something like this. All I know is that I was sitting there, and in my mind, my world had been violated. Someone felt comfortable enough putting their hands on my personal effects, throwing them down the hallway, stripping my bed, and doing the same thing. They were completely okay with doing this. And in my mind, I had no idea what to do next. I didn't know who to call. I didn't know if I should call home. I just didn't know. Because again, when you're violated, you don't necessarily know what is the most prudent course of action. Because at this point in time, I'm still a freshman. I've only been at the school for like I said, about a month and a half. I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody well enough to say, hey, dude, this just happened. What should I do? What the hell? So I sat there for about an hour contemplating what my next world move would be. And to be very honest, I didn't know what to do. And this is one of the things that you've got to understand what happens when you're violated. When you're violated, a lot of times what happens is that the zone of safety or the zone of comfort that you have in terms of your ability to move in a space has been removed. Now you have to face the reality that something or somebody has done something to take that away from you. So you have to now make some very critical decisions. What is your response to that? And can you move forward in that space knowing that your safety was violated? Keep in mind this. In my mind, I went down each step. My first thought was, I should go grab a bat and start beating someone, because that was literally what rushed through my head. But then you have to think about everything that flows from that. You're thinking assault and battery. You're thinking about going to jail. You're thinking about getting kicked out of school. You're thinking about losing your financial assistance. You're also thinking about the financial burden on your parents to get you out of jail. You're now thinking about how is it possible for me to transfer to another school. All that gone. So then I'm thinking, okay, well, if I can't do that, who can I go to tell? And if I go tell them, what is their response going to be? I mean, if I go to the RA, again, I wasn't thinking like that. What do I do in terms of that? And then the other part that popped in my mind is that even after the fact, I still had another month and a half to stay in this room with these people. I did not know how was I going to look at anybody in their face, knowing that they made the conscious decision to put their hands on my personal effects, throw my clothes as if it was trash on the ground outside. Because then, as I thought about it more, I kept thinking, what if somebody would have discovered these clothes and not knowing who they belonged to, threw them in the trash? That literally would have meant all of my personal effects would have been destroyed, just like that. And so then I got madder again because I was thinking if I had not come to the floor and discovered this first, what would have happened to my clothes if somebody else did? So now I'm in this situation where I'm in my mind feeling like I've been violated twice. Because had I not got here, I would have found myself walking to the situation where the clothes wouldn't have been there, but I would have walked into the bedroom, into our room, and recognized that my clothes were gone and my linen was gone. Then I would have literally only had the clothes on my back. Again, whole new reality. And this is what happens when you find yourself, because what ends up happening is not only does the violation from the actual violation kick in, all the potential things that you're thinking about kicks in. You're literally being traumatized in multiple ways because once that zone has been removed, every way that you've been violated is now in front of you. And so now here I am, again, sitting on my bed for about a good 30 to 40 minutes, not only going through what the scenarios are, but also now going through this feeling of rage of knowing all the ways this could have been so much worse. And I have no idea what my next day looks like. But sometimes the worst part about the violation is when it's being dismissed. Like, it's one thing if somebody breaks into your house and steals something, you get angry because somebody violated your space. It's another thing when the people who violate it don't see anything wrong with violating your safety. So like in my case, I'm sitting there and next thing I know, 3 people walk in the door. It's my 2 roommates and my roommate's girlfriend. And of course they're giggling, talking smack because again, they didn't think they did anything wrong. And so I'm sitting here and I didn't say a word. I'm just sitting here. And I remember the girlfriend who came in with them. She looks up at the bed and she sees me sitting next to this ball that she presumes is clothes. And so she's like, Tony, I'm just curious. Why are you sitting next to a ball of clothes? And I turned to her and I said, because these guys, and let's be clear, I didn't see them do it, but they didn't deny they did it either. But I said, these 2 guys stripped my bed, took all of my clothes that was in the corner here, and threw them out in the hallway. And they started giggling. And so, of course, I'm getting angry. And I'm like, so you just think that's funny, right? I don't understand why. What's so funny? And so she's confused. I'm starting to get incensed. I was already angry, but I'm like at this point where I'm trying to logically not lose it. And so the guy who slept in the bunk beneath me said, well, the problem is that I was itching. And his complaint was, for some odd reason, he had started itching while he was in his bed. And so as a result, he had just made the determination that the itching had to be caused by my linen from my bed because I had had a stack of dirty clothes in the corner, which gave him an indication that he felt meant I was dirty myself. And that's why he was itching. So at that point, I proceeded to tell him, hey, I'm not itching. When I sleep at night, none of my linen causes me to itch. Did it ever dawn on you that if I'm not itching, that maybe it's you? And at that particular point, both of them kind of stopped and thought about it from a logic. You know, we're all 18, so you're not trying to give an excuse. But he stops, and that moment hits him where he's like, okay, I see your point. He didn't say that, but you can see they're kind of throttling back because the point I'm trying to make is if there's 2 of us in this bunk bed, you're itching in your bunk bed, on your bottom bunk, but I'm not itching in mine. If I'm not itching, it's not because I'm causing, because presumably, if I'm the one causing the itching, I should be itching too. So how is it that I'm not itching, but you're itching? And so finally, at that point, he goes to the next step where he's like, well, I'm just saying, you know, you got this stack of dirty clothes in the corner. When you plan on washing your clothes, man? And I turned to him and I said, you do realize, because the difference between the 3 of us, and I didn't say this, and this is a side note, one of our other roommates, the one who had a bed to himself, his parents where he was in a better socioeconomic position. And then the guy who was in the bed bunk below me, he lived in Melbourne. So he would regularly go home to Melbourne whenever he washed. He never washed in the building. He would take his clothes and go home and wash and then come back. And so I'm the only one who didn't have the ability to do that and didn't have money to be able to wash regularly. So I turned to him and I said, in case you don't know, it costs money to wash clothes. Did it ever dawn on you that if I'm not washing my clothes, it's not because I am choosing to not wash my clothes and I have the money? Maybe, just maybe, it's because I don't have the money to wash my clothes. And you could kind of see the lights click in where they're like, oh, never thought about it like that. They never thought about you like that because and I didn't say this to them, they had made the thought that I had consciously made the decision to be dirty. Dirty clothes. Mind you, I'm wearing clean clothes, but they're making the assumption that since I'm not washing my dirty clothes, I choose to be dirty. And they're extrapolating that dirtiness to me without ever contemplating or considering my circumstances. And so again, when I'm telling them this, so I'm hitting with two logical points. I'm not itching. That's you. If I'm not washing my clothes, it's because I don't have the money to wash my clothes. I can only wash with the money I have. I can't wash with the money I don't have. And so finally, they turned and they were like, well, why did you just ask us for money? Now, mind you, remember, as I indicated earlier, we had some tensions here in our room. And I'm the kind of guy that if I know that we can't move a particular way, I'm never going to ask you for help. And so at this point, I'm thinking to myself, and I'm telling them, but we've already had a couple of dust-ups here in our room about certain things related to things that you had a problem with. If I know that's how you get down, why would I ask you for money? So think about that for a second. You've made it very clear to me that there are certain circumstances that you have a problem with me about. That's fine. But if that is the case, why would you think I would feel comfortable asking you for money in light of that? And again, strike three. So you're itching because of you. Clothes ain't got any money. You've made it clear that we're not cool about certain things, so why would I ask you for money? So at that particular point, they were like, well, we're here. We can give you some money to help you wash your clothes, which totally pissed me off. Because at that point, I'm like, wait a minute. So now after causing me trauma and violating my space and recognizing that what you did was very wrong, you now want to offer help? And at that particular point, I said, don't touch my clothes. Leave me alone. I'll work it out. And I literally walked out the door to try to figure out what my world was going to look like next. And when I say that, I mean that from the standpoint that I had to walk out. I mean, I had to leave. And you're thinking, I know I got partners because I remember telling the story to some of my friends, people who would befriend me later, who literally said to me, are they still on campus? We can make sure this never happens to anybody else. And I'm like, it's not going to go down like that because in my mind, I am thinking about everything I have to lose. And that's what I told them then. But even when I walked out the door, I thought about everything I had to lose. In my mind, I kept saying, if I were to be violent right now, I would have a clear-cut reason, a clear-cut justification for wiling out. But in my mind, all I kept thinking was everything that flowed from it. In my mind, I kept thinking about me getting kicked out of school. In my mind, me not being able to become an officer in the military. In my mind, this impacting my ability to even transfer to another school. I kept thinking about all of the things I would lose. But I was struggling to reconcile all of those potential losses with the actual loss of my safety. So I'm sitting here thinking, these are the things that will harm me. And all I kept thinking of myself as I was sitting there was, if all these things are going to happen to me, what's going to happen to them? Because they literally took an action against me and there's nothing to flow from it. They have faced no consequence. So I was completely clueless as to what happens. And this is one of the confusions that people face when you're in a position when you're violated. You go through all these scenarios of what can you do to try to resolve that, because your main focus is how can I get my safe space back. But sometimes you just can't get it back. So then you start thinking about all the things you'd like to do to reestablish a measure of safety. Because let's be clear, if I'm going in there, I'm not only going there to punish someone. If I'm talking about grabbing a bat or causing physical harm, I'm also trying to reestablish that there are certain things you won't do, and violating my safety is the one thing you will never do. But at this point, I had no clue what to do. So unfortunately, I was left to my devices. and I proceeded to go to the place where I believed I needed to be at that time. So for those of you out there who are probably, well, where did you go? I think, well, there is a park on our campus. Like, again, it's a small park, and it sits literally on the bank of the Hillsborough River. And so I went out there and I sat on a park bench. I probably was out there for about half an hour to an hour because I realized how alone I was. Nothing triggers survival mode more than realizing you are now faced with a situation you have to now get yourself out of. Now, let's just be clear. I could have easily contacted my mom. I could have contacted one of my uncles. Uncles who had gone to college, mom who'd gone to college. There were people, but none of those things readily registered in my mind because in my mind, all I kept thinking was, I chose this school. I chose to come here. And as such, I have to deal with everything that flows from my decision. And so I sat there on the bench and I cried. Cried because I didn't know what to do. I never felt so alone more in that moment. I didn't have anybody to turn to. I didn't have anybody to give me guidance. I had nothing that I could hold on to. I was helpless. And that's the other part that comes that we don't talk about in terms of that zone. And here's the thing that's even more fascinating. I'm at this school. It's 95% white. There were some black students I probably could have turned to, but it would have never crossed my mind to even reach out to them. When you're in a place where you feel your safety has been violated, sometimes the worst feeling in the world is not moving yourself to a place where you can no longer have to feel that. It's when you now feel like you're in this powerful position where you have no options. My problem at that time was I felt I had no options. So now I'm not crying about what I just had happen. My crying was from the standpoint that I had another month and a half to be in this space, and I don't feel safe. So how do I go and take a bath? How do I sleep at night? Studying is a little easier. I can just, grab my books and go find a space and just study by myself. But at some point, I've got to go back to the room. At some point, I'm going to have to engage these people. At some point, they're going to have to interact with me. I had no idea of how I was going to navigate this. Now, ideally, what you should do is, and if anybody were to have this happen to them, I would tell them, go to talk to your RA, see about getting yourself out of that room, because clearly your safety has been compromised. There's nothing you can do, nothing they can do to reestablish that. But I didn't do that because I didn't think of that as an option. Again, I was clueless. I'd never experienced anything like this before. And so I didn't know what to do. So only thing I could do was just sit there and figure out, how can I maneuver now in this new space where my safety has been violated? And the people who violated are still there and have no remorse for what they did. At that point, it was really about survival mode. At that point, I had to acknowledge the fact that I was not going anywhere anytime soon. I could have turned to the resident advisor and asked them to see about moving me out. But the reality is I'm not sure if they would have been able to move me out in the middle of the semester. I never gave them that opportunity because in my mind, I had told myself this was a situation I had created by being in this situation, by going to this school, being placed in this room, even though I had no control over being placed in that room with those individuals. But recognizing that this was where I was at, I had to figure out how to make it work. In my mind, I told myself, only come back to the room when you absolutely have to. So I made a point to leave first thing in the morning and never come back. So I took all my, whatever classes I had for the day, I took all my books with me, and I just never came back to the room. Went to the cafeteria, ate. Even after my last class was over, I studied in places as long as I could. I would come home as late as I possibly could. So in essence, I would walk in the door when it was dark. I would leave the room when it was dark. And this, in my mind, was my way of surviving this circumstance. Because, to be very honest, in my mind, I was thinking, okay, what do I need to do next? Critically, I was thinking that maybe I need to think about transferring. And if I'm being honest, probably dropping out and going to another school sometime the following fall. Because I had already decided in my mind, this is probably not going to work for me. So when you're in survival mode, when your safety has been compromised, You're just trying to get through the moment until you can find a way to reestablish your safety. And that's some of the things that I did. Now, for those of you who are wondering, how did you eventually resolve this situation? Well, unbeknownst to me, there was another black kid on campus, Frank, who he and I met literally when we first got there during freshman orientation. He was a freshman as well. And somehow we bumped into each other. Like we met at the very beginning of the semester in August, but we didn't really engage each other till about the middle of October when this incident happened with me. And I bumped into him, and I had no idea that he was going through something similar. Like his roommates had done something with him equally violating. And as such, he had made the determination after involving his family, because he had family in the area who basically helped him. They came and they were like, yeah, violence is going to happen if you ever cause problems with my cousin again, which he had a slightly different incident. And it was funny because when I was telling him about mine, he had even offered, he was like, I got cousins. We can make sure this don't happen again. And all I kept thinking was, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. So what he did was, in the course of me talking to him, and we spent a lot of time just kind of talking up the fact that we both were going through this miserable experience with our roommates. He was like, well, hell, why don't we room? And so what we ended up happening is that we had me, and he had two other partners of his, two other guys that he knew were really cool, that they had said to him, we should get a room together, but we need a fourth. And so the fourth was me. So he asked me if I'd be willing to transfer my rooms from my room on the 9th floor to the 4th floor in the same building. And I agreed. This was great. So effectively, my interaction with Frank made it possible for me to solve my own problems. And so as such, all I had to do was tough it out for the remainder of the semester. The other part was great, was that because Frank knew that I was going through all these trials and tribulations, he made his resources in terms of dealing with it mine. So what does that mean? Well, like I said, he had family members in Tampa that were actually fairly close, within walking distance, like I'd say like 5 or 6 blocks. So what he would do is he would never let me stay in the room. So like when the weekend came, when you're like, oh, man, I don't want to spend the whole day sitting in the in the hall or sitting in the library studying because I can't be in my room. He would go to Tampa. I mean, he would go over to West Tampa, which was right next to the school, right next to our school, where his cousins and his aunt and uncles lived. But he would come get me first. So literally every weekend he would come get me first. So he would be like, hey, going over here to my, he would come in, come in the morning. I'm going over and spend the day with my cousins. Come on. And he wouldn't say, do you want to come? He would be like, come on. And that ended up being how we became really close friends, because he knew how miserable I was in this situation. So he would not give me the option to decide. So when at that point, it was kind of funny, because as I felt more comfortable knowing that I had an infrastructure to support me, because his aunts and uncles and his cousins kind of adopted me as one of their own and basically looked after me, I started feeling more comfortable going back into my room, knowing that in my mind, yeah, if something like this happens again, I'm not going to handle it. I'm going to turn this over to somebody who's going to make sure that this, since you obviously aren't listening to me, but you'll listen to somebody else. And so what would happen is that as I got back to the room, Frank made it a point to never let me be in that space too long, because he knew how unsafe it was in his space. So he wouldn't let me stay in my space. So it was regularly, he would come over. Literally every day he would come over and knock on the door and say, hey, going for a stroll, let's go. And so much to the point where I can still remember my roommates like, dude, he's just telling you, you're not. And of course, they're trying to interject. And in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, we have no reason why we should ever communicate, because you kind of blew that. So much so to this point, true story, I was sleeping in the bed, taking a nap, and he banged on the door. And they were like, can I help you? He's like, yeah, where's Tony? He's like, well, he's sleeping. He was like, well, tell him we got to hit the streets. We got to go. He's sleeping. And so literally Frank pushed past the roommate, grabbed me by my pants, pulled me down onto the floor, hit me in the chest and said, all right, let's go. I said, okay. And I was like half asleep. I put my linen back and they were looking at me like, are you going? And in my mind, I'm thinking, we can't talk to each other. You've already told me you don't give a crap about me. So why would I listen to what you have to say? And I walked out the door and gone for the rest of the day. That was the nature of our work environment. And that was the nature of our school environment for the remainder of the semester. And I loved it because once he and I moved in with each other, the two other guys who were supposed to come with us, didn't come back to school that semester. So we had a four bedroom room, two guys. Wonderful. Loved it. And that gave me a renewed interest. And I've often told people that had I not had that extra semester with Frank, I would not have graduated from UT later, because this began the start of a very enjoyable experience at the University of Tampa. And it's amazing what happens, because now it wasn't just that I was with him. It was that I was with somebody I trusted would maintain my safety, and somebody I trusted because he enabled me to have access to his infrastructure, which made him safe. One of the main things I want you to take away from this is understanding how easy it is for your zone of silence to be compromised. In my case, I was in a situation where, in a moment's notice, I went from being in an environment where I thought I could move accordingly to feeling completely helpless. It doesn't matter if it's a physical manifestation or a psychological manifestation. We all desire to move in spaces where we feel safe. I don't care if you're going to church or the movie theaters or the grocery store or to a concert or a park. The moments that you move into a space where you do not feel you can move in a manner where your well-being is actually protected, you're going to move very differently. And all it takes is one simple incident. It doesn't have to be something as traumatic as somebody breaking into your home. It could be something that they said or did around you in such a way that lets you know that your well-being was not something that was of primary interest to them. So remember this and take this as with the most important, utmost of importance. If you are around people who make you feel that you're not safe, your job is to protect your well-being to the best of your ability. And if you don't have people around you who are going to protect your safety, you need to make sure you keep a circle of people around you or in your life who will be just as passionate about protecting your well-being as you are in terms of protecting yourself. I don't know if you know it, but there's always a background and a reason behind I do most of my stories or most of the content that I do. And if you want to know more about it, I got membership groups. Did you know that? And it has members-only shorts or members-only video, inside commentary, special behind-the-look scenes, all of these extra toys so that you can get an appreciation of what was the motivating factor behind the content I produce. If you ever watch my content and you want it more, this is for you.